Good afternoon. I'm Beth Brzezinski, President of GPWomen. Before we begin, I just wanted to make a few announcements. First, as you can see on the screen, GPWomen's final event of the semester and academic year will be on April 19th. It will be a relaxing social event, and then anyone interested in joining our executive board for 2017-2018 is invited to stay for that discussion. Second, GPWomen is honored to be the recipient of a PCCW leadership grant. More information to follow, but we wanted to let you know that the speaker series will continue for the 2017-2018 academic year. We'd love to see you at all of these events. Please make sure that you have joined our listserv to stay up to date. Regarding today's event, during any dialogue or Q&A portion of the program, a representative will be giving you a microphone. We are recording these events for a video library, and it would be helpful if you could utilize it. Likewise, it would be wonderful if you could complete the evaluation form that you were handed when you signed in. We love hearing your thoughts and really do try to incorporate your feedback. On that same note, you will be receiving a follow-up email in a few weeks asking you to evaluate the speaker series as a whole. I know these evaluations can be tedious. We are really trying to keep it short, sweet, and to the point. This programming evaluation will be used as we plan for next year to implement changes both to logistics and content to make improvements to best serve you, our audience. So please, if you can, fill it out. Finally, before I introduce today's speaker, there is one other individual who, on behalf of GPWomen, I would greatly like to acknowledge, Dr. Renee Gossett. Most of you probably don't know her. Renee is a PALS class of 1980 graduate, as well as a graduate of Cornell's College of Veterinary Medicine. She is also a member of PCCW, where she serves on both the mentoring and alumni engagement committees. Most importantly for us, Renee has been tireless in her mentorship, sponsorship, and advocacy for this GPWomen PCCW speaker series. I genuinely mean it when I say to you that this series, both for this year and for next year, would not be possible without her. Renee has volunteered countless hours, never mind relentless energy and enthusiasm to build connections, recruit speakers, and promote women's development. We cannot thank her enough for her efforts, and I would like to ask Renee to stand up so that we can at least give her a well-deserved and overdue round of applause. So, speaking of today, thank you very much for attending this collaboration between the Graduate Professional Women's Network and the President's Council of Cornell Women. In conjunction with the Women's Management Council, the Women's Law Coalition, and the Graduate School, we are pleased to present Negotiating Skills in the Workplace with Jill Gross. Jill Gross is a professor of law at the Elisabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University, where she teaches alternative dispute resolution, securities law, ethics, and lawyering skills. She is an arbitrator for the American Arbitration Association and FINRA's Office of Dispute Resolution, chair of the ADR Section of the American Association of Law Schools, a member of the Securities Experts Roundtable, former chair of the Securities ADR Committee of the ADR Section of Dispute Resolution, former chair of the Practising Law Institute's annual Securities Arbitration program, and a member of the President's Council of Cornell Women. She has published prolifically in the areas of negotiation, mediation, and arbitration of securities disputes, and been retained as an expert in securities arbitrations, litigations, and enforcement proceedings. She received an AD magna cum laude from Cornell University and a JD cum laude from Harvard Law School. Please join me in welcoming Jill with a round of applause.
Okay, thank you everybody for that very warm welcome. I am a very proud Cornell alum. I'm going to be back in Ithaca in June for my 30th reunion, 30th reunion. Hard to believe that I graduated here 30 years ago. Seems like it was yesterday, and I must say my experience at Cornell was far, far superior to my experience at that law school on that other river, far away in some other state. Truly what I tell everybody, actually. So today I have about 45 minutes to teach you what I teach in a semester-long course to my students in negotiation. So I'm going to try to squeeze a lot in. I'm certainly available afterwards to talk further, and I will gladly give out my card, my email. Anybody can certainly follow up with me. I'm happy to talk anytime. I love being on PCCW. I love connecting with students, and I love being helpful to any student in their whatever they want to do in the future. So let me start out with former First Lady Michelle Obama, who I respect greatly and was at Harvard Law School with me. We were a year apart. Actually, I was between her and Barack, so I really had a lot to do with them being so successful. And she was recently interviewed in Parade magazine, and she said, she was speaking about her first job out of law school, and she said it didn't even occur to her to negotiate for a higher salary. She said in a recent interview in Parade magazine, quote, "Now I realize that that's one of the challenges that we have as women. We don't negotiate for ourselves. We don't negotiate hard." Well, I agree with her on so many topics except that statement. I absolutely believe that she was spouting out a negotiation myth that women don't negotiate. And so today, I'm going to try to give you some of the tools to bust those myths, the 3 important myths of negotiation and gender: that women do not negotiate, that women should not negotiate, and that women cannot negotiate. Those are myths. If nothing else, I want all of you to leave here, men and women, to leave here today knowing that negotiation has absolutely nothing to do with gender. What it has to do with is tools. If you have the tools in your toolbox, you will all be able to negotiate. Also, I encourage you to watch a TED Talk by a good colleague of mine who teaches negotiation at Marquette and has done a lot of work in the area of women and gender negotiation. Just Google Andrea Schneider, TED Talk, negotiation. There is the URL, but all you have to do is Google that. It's about 15, 20 minutes, and she also addresses, and this is sort of where I get some of the ideas about myth busting, that women do not, should not, and cannot negotiate. So I'm going to try to give you, again, in my short period of time I have with you today, some tools to help you negotiate. Again, nothing to do with gender, has everything to do with the tools in your toolbox and the preparation. Like everything in life, you are better at it if you practice and prepare. And so I want to give you, as I said, the tools to negotiate. So what is negotiation? Many of you think, well, it's when we try to figure out some way to resolve a dispute. You can call it more formally, I teach it in my class, a process for resolving conflict that involves communication through the use of words or actions, et cetera, all these fancy titles. But what I really want you to remember, again, from today, is that negotiation is 2 things. It is persuasive, and it is communication. Not nobody, but many people don't think of negotiation as a piece of a type of communication. When you negotiate, your job is to get your counter-negotiator. I do not want to use the word adverse party because I don't want you to think of it as an adversarial relationship. I want you to think of them as your counter-negotiator. Counterparty at best, but counter-negotiator is a more positive word. But your job is to persuade your counter-negotiator why your counter-negotiator should agree to the terms that you propose, the terms that you want. And so think of it as this is a communication. This is your opportunity to communicate persuasively to your counter-negotiator why they should agree to what it is you're asking for. And if you don't ask, you won't get. So let me just very briefly, again, this could take up 4 classes in my semester, but I'm going to just introduce to you 2 types of negotiation, 2 different approaches to negotiation. one thing to remember is that some people would like to characterize one as bad and the other as good. They're neither bad nor good. They're different, and they're tools to have in your toolbox. So distributive negotiation, also known as adversarial, competitive, positional. It is the traditional model of negotiating. The goal of that kind of negotiation, that approach, is to maximize the gain for the one who is employing it. The negotiator views the negotiation as a zero-sum game where one party wins and necessarily the other party loses. We call this a win-lose. A distributive negotiator views a pot out there like a pie, and every sliver you take away from the pie for yourself, the other party gets fewer slices, and so you're dividing up a pie. You negotiate from positions, I want that slice, rather than interests, which is the underlying reasons why you want that slice. You want that slice because you're hungry. Your interest is hunger and getting fed. Your position is, I want that slice. Similarly, when you're negotiating for employment, I want $100,000 as my starting salary. That's your position. I want X. Your interest underlying that is, I have financial needs. I want financial security. I need to earn a living to support me and my family or any others who might be dependents. So competitive negotiators focus on the position, I want. They do not focus nearly as much, if at all, on underlying interests. Competitive negotiators start high or low, depending on which side of the equation you're on. They are very reluctant to reveal any information. They share as little information as possible about their position. They move very slowly from one position to another, and they see little need in justifying their positions. Generally, these are overgeneralizations, but again, these are characteristics of a type of negotiation approach. One other item, competitive negotiators have little concern in their framework, in their thinking about future relationship. At the end of a competitive negotiation, you probably don't want to be in the room with your counter-negotiator because you don't feel so good about what you just did, right? But when you're negotiating for employment or a negotiation within your workplace, you are going to have a long-term, hopefully a long-term relationship with these people, right? So you want to make sure that at the end of your negotiation, you feel good about working with, for, or supervising the people around you. And so relationship is something that you want to preserve and focus on when you negotiate. Integrative negotiation. Oh, there was my slide with the pie. Sorry, I didn't forward my slide with the pie. So there you go. You've got your image of you take away a piece of the pie and there's one fewer slice remaining for the other person. So before I get to bad negotiating tactics, I want to just compare this with integrative negotiation, also known as value-creating interest-based problem solving. This is a negotiation approach that is based on the concept of interests. In problem-solving negotiation, negotiators try to work with the underlying interests, needs, concerns of both parties, and try to develop a solution that meets the interests, needs, and concerns of both parties. Adversarial negotiation, I said, was win-lose. This is known as win-win. This is known as where there is an unlimited pie, and that as many additional pieces of the pie you can get, as well as toppings, a la mode, sides of ice cream, right? Additional forks and napkins. There's more out there to get, but we don't look at the pie as just limited to the pie. And so a problem-solving negotiator thinks of all the possible terms that could be added to the pie, particularly in the employment situation, not just salary, right? Salary is certainly important. It's probably the number one thing you want to start with, but there are lots of other terms to be negotiated. A problem-solving negotiator actively listens to what the other counter-negotiator is saying A problem-solving negotiator asks lots of questions before offering or counter-offering any terms. And there is, again, as I said, different labels for this approach, but converting all of the monetary and non-monetary terms into value makes the result an accommodation of both the negotiator and the counter-negotiator. So let me just go to some bad negotiating tactics. There's a list there. There's a few more: insulting first offers, taking extreme positions, few and small concessions, threatening, ignoring the interests of the counterparty. I have 2 videos I was going to show you, but in the interest of time, I'm going to show one, and if we have time, I'll go back to the other. Okay, so before I start with this video, how many of you have seen the movie Erin Brockovich? Oh, good. Oh, good, many of you. So for those of you who have not seen it, just to make sure we're all on the same page, Erin Brockovich was a law clerk in a law firm, and she advocated for a resolution of a dispute with Pacific, let's see, what is it? Pacific Gas and Electric, I believe. There was an argument that they had, through their facility years ago, polluted the water in a town near where she lived with hexavalent chromium. Ultimately, the case was settled against Pacific Gas and Electric for $333 million, which at the time was the largest settlement of a direct class action against a polluter of this type. This is from the movie Erin Brockovich, but it is based on what actually happened. And this is the opening negotiation between Erin Brockovich, her lawyer, and the lawyer for Pacific Gas and Electric. So take a look.
Mr. Ford?
In the interest of putting this whole thing to rest, PG&E is willing to offer the Jensens $250,000 for their home.
$250,000.
In terms of land value out in Hinckley, Mr. Masery, we feel that's a more than fair price.
How about in terms of medical expenses? $250,000 isn't going to come close to what this family's going to have to spend on doctors.
I understand they've had a bad run of luck, health-wise, and they have my sympathies. But that's not PG&E's fault.
You're kidding, right? Look at these readings. PG&E's own technicians documented toxic levels, hexavalent chromium, and those wells. Everything the Jensens have had is proven reaction to exposure to hexavalent chromium. They have had.
Breast cysts, uterine cancer, Hodgkin's disease, immune deficiencies, asthma, chronic nosebleeds.
A million things could have caused those problems. Poor diet, bad genes, irresponsible lifestyle. Our offer is final, and it's more than fair.
Wait a minute. I thought we were negotiating here.
$250,000 is all I'm authorized to offer.
I presented your offer to my clients. I doubt that accepted.
Mr. Masery, before you go off on some crusade, you might want to remember who it is you're dealing with here. PG&E is a $28 billion corporation.
$28 billion? I didn't know it was that much. Wow!
Okay, so see if I can get out of here. Go back. Oh wait, now it's going to be there, right, isn't it? See, the technology gets me every time. Sorry about that. Okay, so look at the list. Insulting first offer, $250,000 when the claim was for millions and millions of dollars, and ultimately the settlement after discovery was for $333 million. They walked out of the room, they had nothing further to negotiate. Taking extreme positions, that's what the negotiator for PS&G, or whatever you call it, Pacific at PG&E took. Few and small concessions. $250, that's what I come in. I have nothing further to offer. We have nothing further to talk about. Threats. Before you go off on some crusade, you better think about what you're doing here, whatever it is he said, and completely ignoring the interests of the counterparty. So there you have example in one clip, how perfect that I was able to find that clip, of so many of the bad negotiating tactics. This is, again, partly about a competitive approach, but it's the tactics themselves that are bad. You can be a good competitive negotiator without using tactics like this. Also notice things like body language. I was trying to use the laser pointer to show body language, eye contact. They sent a junior associate in the law firm for PG&E to negotiate. He put himself in the table forward as if he were in a threatening posture. She just kept her eye contact on, did not adjust her body language, and kept just repeating information about why the party she represented was entitled to more money. So she tried to be more of a problem-solving negotiator. He was competitive. The two of them were talking above each other, and it didn't work out so well for PG&E. So what kind of tactics can you use to be more of a distributive problem-solving negotiator rather than the competitive type? So the classic example of value creation. So you have two siblings fighting over an orange. They're in the kitchen, and they both yelling, screaming at each other, probably sisters, because that's what sisters do. I don't have one, but many of you, I'm sure, do. Two siblings, they're screaming at each other, I want that orange, no, I want that orange, no, I want that orange, no, I want it, I get it, I was here first, you get it, blah, 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 blah. They're screaming, they're finally, what do? They agree to split it in half. Okay, so that's what they do. They split it in half just like you see there. It turns out one eats the part of the orange that she got and throws out the peel. The other one used her half and used the peel because she needed it for a recipe to bake something that needed an orange peel. How could they have better resolved this dispute? Well, they could have actually asked each other questions. Oh, why do you need the orange? Why do you want the orange? Why is that your position? I want to eat it, I'm hungry. Oh, why do you want the orange? I want it because I want the peel for a recipe. Oh, well, we can each have 100% of what we want. I get all of the peel, you can have all of the inside, and everybody is happy, win-win. A very oversimplified example, but a classic illustration of value creation. You started out with 100% and orange, and you created 200%, 100% satisfaction for both parties. And when you negotiate your job, it's much harder to do when you're negotiating for employment than when you're fighting over an orange, but your job is to identify additional terms, additional reasons why you can increase the pie and not just divide it up. Okay, so let's talk about how to go about doing that. So some terms, let's see if I get here. Some terms that you want to be familiar with. Again, tools to have in your toolbox. First, you have the zone of possible agreement. The zone of possible agreement is the unknown range within which all parties would agree. A competitive bargainer properly tries to capture as much of the ZOPA as possible. So let's assume, let me just go over to the next slide and then I'll go back. So for ZOPA, assume Jan is negotiating with Harry for a job. Assume Jan will not take the job at any salary below $50,000. That is Jan's RP, otherwise known as her reservation price. The number below which she will not go, her walkaway price. Her reservation price is $50,000. She will not take the job at any number below that. Harry, the employer, will not offer more than $55,000. That's what his budget has. That is his reservation price on behalf of the employer. So the ZOPA is that darker shaded area in between. It is 50 to 55. That is all there is to negotiate. There is no way that Jan will take the job below 50. There is no way that Harry will offer more than 55. You don't know that going into your negotiation. But part of your preparation is to estimate as best as you can the ZOPA. So you know the range within which you can negotiate the term of salary, again, putting aside some of the other terms. So part of what you need to do when you prepare for negotiation, identify your own reservation price, estimate to the best of your ability, based on information you have, your counter-negotiator's reservation price, and set about trying to capture as much of the ZOPA. In other words, $54,999 as your starting salary. Wouldn't that be wonderful? You may end up somewhere in between. But again, you're aware of the ZOPA, and when you negotiate, you know, or you have a good sense of how far you can go and how far the counter-negotiator is going to go. It is possible that there is no zone in which either party will agree because their reservation prices are, do not overlap at all, and in that case, any kind of agreement is highly unlikely. You don't know that going in, and so your job again is to estimate. How do you estimate? You research. You find out information. You look to see what other people in comparable jobs get paid. Information is power. The more information you have about what other employers pay similarly situated employees, the more you can estimate the ZOPA, the more you can predict how far each side is willing to go, or the other side is willing to go, the more likely you can comfortably push for 55 rather than stop at 51. There is no doubt that most employers will offer at the lowest range they can. That's what they do. If I knew half of the information I'm telling you today when I started my job in academia, I would be much richer. I did not know how to negotiate, and now I've set most of my career making up for my sin and not knowing how to negotiate, and I'm doing it on an unpaid basis. So how do you go? How do you like that? Right? So part of these tools are tools we don't know. We don't know a lot of this information naturally. We don't learn. I didn't learn it in school. Maybe they're a little better today at teaching it in school. In graduate school, we have sessions like this. But again, it would have been incredibly helpful to me if I had known or had an ability to estimate how far my counter-negotiator was willing to go or could go for me to be able to capture more of that range. Couple other acronyms to keep in mind. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement is the BATNA. An incredibly important data point. It's not really a piece of data, but I'm going to call it that for lack of a better word. Incredibly important piece of information that you have to have prepared in advance. What is a BATNA? The best alternative if you do not reach agreement during your negotiation. What is the alternative? The best possible alternative. It is impossible to evaluate the worth of an offer if you have nothing to compare it to. A BATNA is not a number, it is an action plan. Many people think of a BATNA as a number. What number? That's the reservation price. You'll walk away if you don't get anything above $50,000. If you get offered $49,999, that's your reservation price. You'll take it at $50,000. Your BATNA is what's going to happen tomorrow if you don't have an agreement. You'll be unemployed, maybe, or you have another offer, or you have a lead for another job. And your job going into a negotiation is to improve your BATNA as best as possible because that gives you more leverage. So before you go into a negotiation, get yourself another offer to a job that is your second choice. I know, easier said than done, right? But this is the idea behind some of this preparation. So get yourself another interview. Say to yourself, all right, my best alternative is to go on this interview. You can calculate the likelihood that you're going to get this. Many of you are scientists. You can do a probability calculation. You can then say, if I get this other job, they're going to pay me $40,000 at best, right? It's not even the action plan yet. It's a possible action plan. But you can compare that alternative to any offer that's given. And then perhaps a different offer will look differently to you, and you have to evaluate the worth of that offer. To evaluate it in a vacuum would be making a mistake. And so when you negotiate, you want to go in knowing your reservation price and knowing your BATNA. What is the alternative if you do not reach an agreement today? What are you going to do? What's your alternative? Always have that in the back of your pocket. Sometimes I write it down on a sheet of paper to keep reminding myself, if I don't reach an agreement, I'm going to be unemployed and I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. Or if I don't reach a job, well, I have other alternatives and it won't be so bad. The more you're able to improve your BATNA in advance of the negotiation, line up other options, know your options, have them listed, you'll be in a much better position to negotiate. You'll feel much stronger about what it is you're asking for. You won't walk away as much. You're less likely to do so psychologically if you know what your BATNA is, if it's a strong BATNA. If you have a weak BATNA, that's also an important piece of information to know. If you know you have no other options, and if you don't get a job starting soon, you're going to have bills to pay, you're going to go in default on your student loans. I don't mean to paint a terrible picture, but it's the reality of life. And so at that point, you have to evaluate a job offer against that weak BATNA. The more you can improve your BATNA before you go into negotiation, the better off you're going to be. I can also talk about a WATNA, but I'm going to skip that because that's just so sad. Okay, how are we on time? I think I'm doing okay. So the stages of negotiation. And most of us think as stage 4 as really the only stage of negotiation, which is the bargaining phase, but there's many more stages for you to be aware of. The most important one is that bullet point up there. If I walk away and I don't tell you anything else, remember, there is much more to negotiation than getting into the negotiation session. It's about preparation. Everything in life is about preparation and practice. What do you do when you prepare for a negotiation? Well, you're going to engage in a series of assessments that I'm going to talk about on the next slide. And each of those assessments will give you information for when you negotiate. If you do not have this information in front of you, if you haven't made these assessments, you're not in a strong enough position to negotiate. You will feel better about your negotiation. You will be in a much better position to negotiate important terms of employment. I'll get back to the preparation phase. In initial interaction and offers, the second most underrated part of negotiation in terms of the process, well, maybe the third. Well, up there. The first 3 are much more important than the last 4. So initial interaction, body language, eye contact. As much as possible, try to negotiate in person. It is much harder for the counter-negotiator to turn you down in person as opposed to via email, via text. Many negotiations take place via text now. Well, really? Right? Think about how many miscommunications we've had in our personal relationships via text. Can you imagine? Right? So employment, initial interaction. Make sure that you are in person if at all possible. If your employer says, I can only speak to you at such and such a time and you're in different geographical locations, Skype if you can. We all have the technology now. You want to be able to make eye contact, much more effective in negotiation. Those initial interactions must be positive. Do not start with the first thing of what number you want. Do not start at the number. Start at anything else. The weather, start at ice breaking. You've all, I'm sure, learned how to do some ice breaking. Do some ice breaking. Get the person to see you as a human being who has needs, wants, and concerns, not just positions. I want X dollars. That's the first words out of your mouth. They're not going to see you as a human with interests, wants, and concerns. Offers, perhaps there has been an initial interaction of offer. My preference is always, we're not going to talk about numbers yet. We're just not going to talk about it. What are we going to do? We're going to exchange and refine information. That's what we do first. We ask questions. When I teach you about the assessments you're going to do, one of them is an information assessment. What it is that you do know about the position, what it is that you don't know. Before you negotiate, answer as many of the don't knows as possible. For example, how do you base your raises? Are they based on cost of living increase or are they merit based? If you start out at $50,000 at a job that only gives for its lifetime cost of living increases, by year 3, you will be underpaid compared to a job where you start out at $40,000 or $45,000 that does merit-based raises, right? And so definitely worth considering and asking the question, how do you base your raises? How do you determine promotions? Is it based on somebody who puts out the most volume of work? Is it based on somebody who puts out the highest quality work? Is it somebody who puts in the most hours, right? And you can assess whether that type of promotion suits you and your interests. Are you somebody who puts in the hours and is willing to do that, and maybe it takes you a little bit longer? Or are you somebody who's really more task-oriented and whatever it takes, you get it done quickly and you don't want to be judged on your hours? Maybe in science, not as important. In law, very, very important. I made the mistake of taking a job where I was judged on my hours. I'm a quick worker. I do things quick, for better, for worse. It was the worst match for me, right? And I did not ask that question when I went in. Could I have found out even if they didn't tell me? Yes, I could have researched. I could have called people in my network. Again, network. Exchange numbers of your colleagues in similar fields, your peers. You call them after you get out of Cornell, you have your degree, you call each other and you say, I'm applying for a job in X company. Do you know anything about working at this company? Do you know other people who work at this company? Can you connect me with them? Can you find out for me who I can speak to about working at this company? Can you help me find out what comparable salaries are? In addition to networking with people that you might know or might be able to find out, we have so much technology now, so much easier to find out. Google, research, what are the common salaries of people who are similarly situated? Without respect to gender, right? One of the mistakes that women make, and again, I don't mean to say anything negative about men, but this is something that women make, is they ask, well, what does somebody else in this position make? I want to make something comparable. I have a right to make something comparable. The employer answers with only women's salaries. They don't answer with men. So make sure when you ask for comparables, you make sure that they give you examples of both women and men. And if they are reluctant to do so, red flag. Red, big red, go big red. Okay, so again, just examples of the kinds of information you want to seek. So you want to seek it from other people that you might know or have access to. LinkedIn, a very powerful tool that you should all be using to connect you with people, but also Google. All kinds of databases now list comparable or salaries information. And so this is all the kind of information you want. Other kinds of things you might want to know, you want to ask about when you're negotiating: sick days, personal days, flexible hours. Do you offer flexible scheduling for anybody who wants to be a parent one day, that men or women? That is a very important piece of information. Do you offer, what's your leave policies? What's your benefits? Obviously, you want to ask about benefits. Things like, let's see, I've got a list of things you might want to ask. What's the timetable for being considered for a promotion? If you go to a company and they don't consider people for 2 years, well, you're not going to get a merit-based raise for 2 years. If another company does reviews every 6 months, guarantees them, you're going to be up for a raise much sooner. Again, starting out maybe at a couple $1,000s lower, but being eligible for reviews and thus raises sooner, the money will catch up very, very quickly. Reporting lines. How many people are you reporting to? You want to know if it's a larger company, if you're going to research in a big corporation, working up the line, how many people are you going to be reporting to? The more people, the less opportunity, this is sort of a generalization, and I've never worked in a research lab, so I can't say from personal knowledge, but my general understanding is the more people you report to, the harder it is to move up the ladder, right? It's just more layered. Less people at the top will be familiar with your work if you don't report to them. Is there an ability to report to somebody higher up? Another thing that people don't negotiate about, women and men, is title. Incredibly important asset in the employment world. It helps you for your next job if you have a higher title. It may seem petty. Some people don't really care what you're called, but other employers out there care what your title is. If they're hiring somebody for a position and they hire somebody who's been a manager versus somebody who has been a coordinator, they're going to hire the manager. Immediately on your resume, you will look stronger. You will look more qualified. And so if you can't negotiate another penny in salary, negotiate a title that would be helpful to you in your future. It will make you more valuable, a non-monetary term that will add value to your package. Sometimes, again, at the entry level, it's hard to negotiate titles, but you never know until you ask, right? Until you ask, you won't know. So all about exchanging and refining information. Then you get to bargaining, the actual back and forth. I don't need to tell you about that. We all back and forth negotiate with friends, relatives, parents, siblings, etc. Or if you've already had jobs, employers. Do more of it, but it's the back and forth. Then you move towards closure. You either reach impasse or you reach an agreement, and then you finalize the agreement. Get it in writing. As a lawyer, I can tell you, get it in writing as much as you possibly can. It doesn't need to be formal if the company is small and doesn't have a legal office. As much as you can, get it in writing. An email with bullets is better than no writing at all. Okay, so get it in writing. So remember I said I'm going to get back to the first phase of negotiation because it's the most important. How do you prepare before you go in? So you need to do 5 different assessments. Interest assessment. What is it I really want? Yes, you want more money. Why do you want more money? My underlying interest is in financial security because I want money to pay my bills. I want to feel secure. You don't just want the dollars. That's your position. Know your interests. Know some of your other interests. If family is important, know that you have an interest in having flexible schedules. If you have, everybody has a psychological interest in being valued for their time and their work, in being recognized for your ability, your expertise, your education. You have human interests in eating, having a roof over your head, possibly getting exercise may be a very strong interest of some people. If there's access to an exercise facility, that can make a big difference in your life, in your work life, and the quality of your life. Perhaps if they can't offer you more salary, they can pay for your gym membership. You never know until you ask. You tell them, I have a very strong interest in exercise. I'm just picking an example of something that might be important to some of you. It may not be important to some of you at all. But identify what your interests are so you can get as many of interests on your list satisfied as you could without that list. Okay? So the interest assessment, what are your underlying needs? What are your reputational interests? I need a title in order to move on. I need a certain salary. What are your relationship interests? I need to be working with another person. Some people work great on their own. Other people work better with other people supervising them closely. So identify your relationship interests. But identify as many of your interests as possible. Once you max out the salary that you can get, focus on meeting some of your other interests. If you are in a workplace and you are satisfied on 99% of your interests, you will be in a great place, even if you wish you had a couple of dollars more, because your life, your quality of life will be so much better. Rights assessment. You have very few rights at the more junior level, but you do have the right under the law to equal pay for equal work, to not be discriminated against on the basis of any protected characteristic. You also have the right to be treated fairly. Knowing you have those rights and having them on your piece of paper in front of you when you go into a negotiation will give you the knowledge that you cannot give up those rights, that you should not give up those rights, and that you need to enforce those rights. Again, it's partly psychological, partly human nature, but you want to have these lists in front of you or have made those assessments in advance. Power. Again, you have very little power as you are in the entry-level situation, but your power will increase as you get more known for your work, as the quality of your work is recognized. And so an assessment that at a junior level is probably less likely to be important does get important as you get more senior in your employment. Information assessment, I've already talked about. As many questions as you can think of that you might want to ask before you start bargaining that will give you the information you need. Write a list of questions. Have a list of information you already know and a list of information you want to get during the information exchange part of your negotiation. Calculate your reservation price. Have it on a piece of paper. What number you will walk away, at which you will walk away. It's too low or too high depending on which side you're on. Identify and improve your BATNA as much as possible before you enter into the negotiation. Negotiating in the workplace, and I'm going to have to stop in a few more minutes before I answer as many questions as you might have. Again, throwing all this out at you very quickly. So you might think, well, the only thing I'm negotiating for is salary. Well, when you get into the workplace, first you're going to negotiate your initial job offer, including salary, terms of employment. You're going to negotiate at some point, if not right off the bat, when you're entitled to a raise. Many workers don't ask for a raise. They're not going to get one if they don't ask. You want to negotiate for a raise at regular intervals. You're going to negotiate for promotions. Again, even if it doesn't come with money, it comes with title. That's an asset that you can then negotiate for a better job in your future. You want to think about not just the short term, but the longer term of your career. New or changed assignments. Perhaps you're in a large company and you're on an assignment or a project that is not meets with your career goals. You might want to negotiate for a new or changed assignment or project. Deadlines for workflow. You might want to negotiate for deadline depending on other things you have going on in your life. You need these skills to be able to negotiate for that. Office transfers. Maybe you're in one location and your family wants to move to a different city. You want to negotiate to move offices. That's another time when you're going to need your negotiating skills. Department transfers. Who are your direct reports? Who are your supervisors? Sometimes some people respond better to a different supervisor. Other supervisors are known for how well they mentor their employees. You want to find out who those people are and negotiate to have them be your supervisor. When you have conflicts with coworkers, you're going to need to negotiate your way out of those. If you're lucky enough to be in a company that has an ombuds person that helps work out inter-workplace conflicts, use that office, but most companies don't have that. So you need to negotiate your way out of conflict with coworkers. And the terms of departure. You always want to leave a job with a recommendation letter in hand, a commitment from the company to not give you any negative reviews, God forbid, right? And a commitment to accepting phone calls from other employers to discuss the quality of your wonderful work. Again, these are just some of the lists. The list could go on. That's all that I wanted to fit on this slide. But these are just examples of all the different areas you might be negotiating in the workplace. And every one of these interactions, these negotiations, you want to do your 5 assessments: interests, rights, powers, information, etc. And you want to identify your reservation price, you want to improve your BATNA, and you want to think about increasing the pie, having an orange create 100% value rather than having just slices of pie divided up among the workforce. Finally, practice. Practice, practice, practice. If you have a roommate, a significant other, a friend, a colleague, practice, role play. Super important because it'll help you articulate all of these abstract thoughts and get you practicing how to do them in an actual interaction with an employer. And it will put you, every single practice will make you that much better at negotiating. So with that, I will stop. I know we're almost out of time, and I'll take any questions that any of you might have.
How can you make sure that even though you have a right to be paid equally, how do you make sure that you're getting that if there's not good comparable information in terms of that? Should you say anything up front about that and say, I know I'm a woman and what are you going to do about that sort of thing?
I mean, it's a great question. I think you have to know your audience, right? That's one thing we learn about in anything in life, know your audience, and it really does depend. I think many employers will be put off by an identification right away as a woman who's negotiating, right? Don't think of yourself as a woman in that setting. Think of yourself as a potential employee who has the right to be paid fairly and equally for comparable work. Again, when you ask, well, what are other men paid? Don't ask for men. Just what are some of your other employees paid for similar work? And if they start identifying them, oh, what's their names? Maybe I could speak to them. And if all the names are women, you can think privately about that. Michelle Obama, when I talked at the beginning, she then said in her second job, she said when it came time to negotiate for the last job she held before her husband became president, she brought her daughter Sasha, who was a baby, to the interview because she didn't have a babysitter available. She told her boss, or future boss, this is what I have, 2 small kids, my husband's running for the US Senate, I will not work part-time, I do need flexibility, I need a good salary, I need to be able to afford babysitting, I can work very hard on a flexible schedule. He said yes to everything. Okay, now, it was a woman whose husband was running for Senate, right? She did come from Harvard Law School, so she had powers, right? That's somebody who has more powers in her powers assessment. But she explained why, her underlying needs. They do have something to do with the fact that she's a woman, but she's a parent, and men are parents too, and have similar needs depending on what their arrangements are for their child care. So it's not a gender thing, particularly anymore. It may have been 30 years ago when I got out of college, but it's different, right? It's certainly different. And so you have to know your audience. And that's when being a problem-solving negotiator is so much more important. A competitive negotiator, yes, there is research out there that women are perceived, when they do competitive negotiation, they're perceived negatively, right? As opposed to men who are perceived to be powerful when they negotiate and smart and savvy. Don't be a competitive negotiator, be a problem-solving negotiator, and you avoid that whole problem entirely.
Thank you again for the presentation, and I wondered, you spoke to 7 steps of negotiating, and you covered the first 3, which I think was really elucidating. I wonder if you could just briefly speak to the last one.
There we are. I know, I went very quickly.
No, that's okay.
Right. Bargaining, right, absolutely. Bargaining, moving toward closure, reaching impasse or agreement, and finalizing the agreement. Those are the 7 steps. And in my opinion, and from what I've seen in the research, The most underutilized stage is preparation, absolutely. And the second most underutilized phase is exchanging and refining information. Every single time I do a simulation with my law students, the first things out of their mouth when they get into the room is bargaining. Like, wait a minute, didn't I just teach you in the classroom that before you get to bargaining, you ask questions, gather and refine information. And when they do a new simulation, using that technique, the outcome for their clients, if they're in a lawyer situation, is far better. Same theory applies to whether you're negotiating on your own behalf or whether you're doing it on behalf of the client. So preparation and exchanging and refining information are the two most underutilized, in my view, phases of negotiation. Initial reactions is a close third, for the reasons I previously stated.
Hi, I'm from Mexico, and until I moved here, I have been in positions where it was totally transparent how much everybody earned. So I was a postdoc, and all postdocs earn whatever, and then I was a professor, and all professors earn, whatever. And I have read about some instances of total transparency in salaries, in that sense. So all, professors in the process of tenure earn whatever, or all researchers type 1, or, what has been your experience in that sense, or what have you known about it?
Well, it does vary by school, but I will say that I have learned after the fact that in my law school that the salaries were not transparent, that men did get paid more for the equal positions, that there's a big difference in research assistant budgets, in teaching hours. That's not a gender thing, that's just people who negotiate better. I have this much value in my research and scholarship, therefore I need to teach less in the classroom if that's what they want. And there are people who do negotiate that, right? There are people who negotiate research assistant money is incredibly valuable to an academic, to any researcher, any scientist. So if you can negotiate, maybe not the money to yourself, but trust me, your life will be better if you have a larger research assistant budget, because they will help you with the work, they will help you improve the quality of your work, which will then lead to better jobs in your long-term career. So in terms of salaries, some places, some departments, some fields are much more transparent than others. It's not necessarily, in my experience, that every academic area is transparent in that. We've actually, in my school, had an effort, particularly by some of the women, to gather everybody's salary and publish it, and there has been not enough agreement among everybody to do that, to have it be effective. So, I have heard of it, but you can Google it. There's a National Association of Law Placement is for entering law students entering jobs, and then there's also SALT, the Society of American Law Teachers, that have the salaries for law professors. So that information is out there, and I can use that to improve my information, and I can bargain on objective principled criteria as opposed to what I make up out of thin air.
Yeah, and I've used those resources when recruiting. I've been a recruiter in banking, but one other source you probably already have used, or you should, is Glassdoor. So when you're looking at a specific company, when you're looking at ABC company versus XYZ company, you go on there and you'll be fortunate if you see people who've said, yes, this is how much I've gotten paid. And you'll see ranges of salaries, so you're dealing with facts. So every company is different too. So within the world of all lawyers, you start out with what you're saying, then you can go to Glassdoor and see if that particular firm is high or low for the industry, and then you can see what people think about it, whether they're nice to work for, this guy's a jerk, blah, blah, blah. But I love Glassdoor, and if you're fortunate enough to find a company that has gotten enough reviews, that is really where I go. And Quora, where you ask a question, in terms of the bigger companies, obviously.
Just had a hand up.
We have time for these two more questions.
Okay. I was wondering if we can step away from the professional setting, corporate setting, and science lab kind of setting. If you could talk a little bit about what kinds of things we can negotiate in the humanities, an academic setting. Or if you could talk about how do we find this information? What are the kinds of things we can negotiate? Because there are certain cultures, right? And there's also certain, laws within each type of institution.
Okay, so you're asking about humanities and
Yes,
academics.
please.
Okay,
Yeah.
so again, I'm not in that field, so I would only be speaking on what general knowledge I have. Let me just tell you, just sort of as an overriding concept, when I was entering academia, I did not have a lot of friends that were in academia. I just didn't. I wish I did. I would have called them on the phone and say, what terms should I be negotiating for? And they would have told me, and this applies to many academics, not just law. Research assistant budget, stipends for research, leave for scholarly work, course load, publishing requirements by particular year versus sometimes they count them by the semester versus the year. If you know, for example, that you want to have a child in a particular semester, can you negotiate for your scholarly output to be increased in the year after versus the year of? Again, this is more for women than for men, but again, parental leave would be the same thing for men. You could be negotiating for the types of courses, your course package, right? It's very important in academics if they teach in an area in which they write, the teaching and the writing create a synergy that reduces the amount of time that you would spend on both tasks. You'd be killing two birds with one stone and be more productive. So an academic wants to negotiate a course package that includes at least one or two courses that will help them in their research. You're going to have to teach one of the required classes or entry-level classes, but in addition to that, you want to negotiate classes that will help you or synergize well with your scholarship. Those are the kinds of things that you want to think about. If there's anybody else in the room who is more expert at the humanities, to speak to that field particularly, please speak up. But definitely, if you have a professor that you have as a mentor, meet with that professor. I am sure that he or she would be glad to help you on that road and make a list for you of the kinds of terms. People are really generally nice and want to help others. That's why I'm here.